Hello, welcome back to Wednesday Word. Thank you for being back with me today. I hope you were with us last time as we started a brand new, albeit short study of the minor prophet book named Nahum. We learned that we don't know very much about this man, not even where he's from helps us much because we don't know where that is. We do know, though, that he is one of only 3 prophets whose content was primarily directed toward or about a Gentile nation. Even though we talked at length about the fact that Nahum not only says, Assyria, you're doomed because God's against you, but he encourages Judah in this process, and there really is no correction of wickedness in Judah in this book, so that makes it a little bit different. We did see some poetic language, a powerful description of the character of God, how great he is, how incomparable his power is, and how that power is a threat to the enemies of God and the enemies of God's people, but at the same time, it's a comfort to those who put their faith and trust in God, because he becomes their stronghold and their source of protection. God is not quick to judge. Nahum reminded us of that. He's patient and long-suffering. Also, we probably need to add, though, I would say, that you cannot presume upon God's patience, because there is a sundown. There's an ending time. There's a limit. One day, his patience runs out. So whether we're talking about this period of time or modern time, God's merciful, he's faithful, he's long-suffering, but one day he will say that's enough. Now, we talked a little bit about natural phenomena and how God is powerful and in control, how there is no power anywhere or in anyone that can possibly compare to or compete with. Even the elements of nature literally shrink before his power. So we talked about the background, the foundation for the book, what was going on politically that was impacting. We looked at the content of what we call the first section, even though it roughly is going to equate with chapter 1, and then we ran out of time. So I want to go back and pick up verse 15 of chapter 1. We did not have time to cover it, and it's actually an important verse because Nahum is not quoted in the New Testament. The closest thing you can find to a quote is related to verse 15 of chapter 1. And I will have to say that he borrowed the gist of it from Isaiah. So we're going to look at what Nahum wrote, then go back and look at what Isaiah wrote, and then look at what the New Testament does with that. So hang with me. This is Nahum chapter 1, verse 15. Excuse me. And it says, Behold, on the mountains, the feet of him who brings good tidings, who proclaims peace. O Judah, keep your appointed feasts. Perform your vows. For the wicked one shall no more pass through you. He is utterly cut off. So what's God promising to Judah? Now remember, he's against his enemy. In this case, it's Assyria. And he's for his people who actually trust in him. So we're going to see that God is promising to restore Judah. He's promising peace for Judah. He's promising to defeat the enemies of Judah and to bring literally doom on Nineveh. So certainly that's intended to console Judah. Now, in what way did Nahum borrow from Isaiah? Let's look at Isaiah 52 and verse 7. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. Now those first 2 lines there are very similar. who proclaims peace, exactly the same. Who brings the glad tidings of good things, we've shifted. Who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Now, in this verse here in Isaiah, you clearly see both a near term and a long term application. So there is a direct reference to honoring people who bring good news, such as the captives have been released from Babylon. But it also clearly relates to the message of salvation that would one day be fulfilled through the Messiah, a message that the followers of Jesus Christ would then one day pass on to others. That at the end, that message is clear. Your God reigns, or the kingdom of God has come to earth through Jesus Christ and through the prophecy and what would ultimately be fulfilled in him. So God, whether near fulfillment or distant fulfillment, honors those who spread the good news because that message is both beautiful and blessed. Well, what does the New Testament do with the merging of those ideas? Romans 10:15. And how shall they preach unless they're sent? You hear this idea of sharing the good news. As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. What about Ephesians 6:15? And having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. So we know that Paul borrows that imagery from the Old Testament, initially Isaiah and then also Nahum, that imagery of beautiful feet to teach and share the good news, and those feet are blessed because of what they do. So the same way in the Old Testament, the people joyfully received messengers who brought good news of peace and freedom, freedom from enemies like Assyria, freedom from enemies like Babylon. Just so there is also joy among those who share the good news of the freedom we can have from sin, the freedom we can have from the dominion of Satan, all through the power of Jesus Christ. So there's still a blessing on those who share the good news, and it's beautiful. So in verse 15, the first half of that verse is very similar to the Isaiah verse and then to the application in the New Testament. But in verse 15, about halfway through, Nahum's message is different. Did you notice he said, O Judah, keep your appointed feasts, perform your vows. So what's he saying? He's basically saying, look, you've been besieged by the Assyrians. You're about to be delivered. And when that happens, you don't have any excuses, nothing to hinder you from going back to what is normal religious life. That kind of reminds me of what COVID did to us. And so I believe God is calling us back out of that being isolated, out of settling for less than what we could have. So he's saying, okay, go back to normal religious life. And if you made God promises during this difficult time, keep them. I can't help but think so often when we're in trouble, it's easy to promise things to God, and then when something is better, we forget. But clearly Nahum says, look, God's going to deliver you, but if you made promises, you keep them, and you get back to the sacrificial system. You get back to what the Mosaic Law tells you to do. Remember, all of this is before Jesus Christ. So get back to doing what you've been instructed and told to do. Okay. And then the end of that verse, for the wicked one shall no more pass through you. He's utterly cut off. That's the promise that Assyria is done for because God is against them and he has decided. All right, that leaves us now ready to go into part 2. Verse 15 is interesting. In the Hebrew version, verse 15 of chapter 1 is actually included in chapter 2. I looked at it by itself because it out of this book is, because of the New Testament association, is probably the most familiar verse. Now let's go to chapter 2 and let's look at what we'll call the second part instead of the second chapter. And we're going to see here that very detailed information about the destruction of Nineveh is going to be provided. In fact, the last 2 chapters of this book, I think if I call them graphic, I would not be remiss at all. If it were splashed across the screen, it might need an R rating, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay, chapter 2, verse 1. Let's see what it says. He who scatters has come up before your face. Man the fort, watch the road, strengthen your flanks, fortify your power mightily. For the Lord will restore the excellence of Jacob like the excellence of Israel. For the emptiers have emptied them out and ruined their vine branches. I'll come back to that. The shields of his mighty men are made red. The valiant men are in scarlet. The chariots come with flaming torches in the day of his preparation, and the spears are brandished. The chariots rage in the streets. They jostle one another in the broad roads. They seem like torches. They run like lightning. He remembers his nobles. They stumble in their walk. They make haste to her walls, and the defense is prepared. The gates of the river are opened, and the palace is dissolved. It is decreed, she shall be led away captive. She shall be brought up, and her maidservants shall lead her as with the voice of doves, beating their breasts. Though Nineveh of old was like a pool of water, now they flee away. Halt, halt, they cry, but no one turns back. Take spoil of gold, there is no end of treasure, or wealth of every desirable prize. She is empty, desolate, and waste. The heart melts, and the knees shake. Much pain is in every side, and all their faces are drained of color. Where is the dwelling of the lions, and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion walked, the lioness and the lion's cub, and no one made them afraid? The lion tore in pieces enough for his cubs, killed for his lionesses, filled his caves with prey, and his dens with flesh. Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. Not the first time we've heard that. I will burn your chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the earth, and the voice of your messengers shall be heard no more. Wow. This chapter begins with prophetic details that are looming. The attack on and the destruction of Nineveh is at hand. The Babylonian alliance, including lesser players, the Medes and the Scythians, are almost at the door. You know, we talked last time about the fact that this is probably maybe 10 or 15 years before Nineveh will be destroyed, and the warning is most definitely there, but it's coming and it's looming. So in the first couple of verses, Nahum is actually taunting Nineveh, of course, prompted and directed by God. Do you remember what it says? He who scatters has come up before your face. What on earth is he talking about? He says this coalition, the Babylonians, the Medes, and the Scythians, are about to attack you. They are literally in your face. And he goes on to say, he who scatters is the one that's in your face. So he's basically telling them that, you know what, you used to be a scatterer. You went into people, you conquered them, you hauled them off to exile, you scattered them across your kingdom, you stole their identity and all of their treasures and everything that mattered to them. But now what you used to do to others is going to be done to you. You will be scattered. You will be stripped. You will be mocked. And so, okay, he's saying that. The one who is going to scatter you's literally in your face. But then we have all of these little short exclamation like commands or instructions. Man the fort, watch the roads, strengthen your flanks, fortify your power mightily. So it's almost like he's taunting them. He's saying, look, you better get yourselves ready to fight. You're so big and so strong, and you're such a conqueror, and no one can stand against you. You better get ready. All the while, the message, and it's not even subtle, is that you can do anything you want to, and it's not going to make any difference because the God that is the omnipotent, all-powerful God is against you, and his word is settled in heaven. If he said it, it's going to happen. So those short little clipped commands asking them to make urgent preparations are literally, ironically mocking the Ninevites because there is not one single thing they can do. The comments are sarcastic, they're mocking, they're in no way serious or hopeful. They're actually accentuating the hopelessness of this enemy of Judah. Why? Because the battle is the Lord's, and God will fight for them. God will send someone to be the destroyer and the scatterer on behalf of his people. So after that, in verse 2, Nahum goes on to say, for the Lord will restore the excellence of Jacob like the excellence of Israel. And he's actually using the terms Jacob and Israel to refer respectively to the southern kingdom, Jacob, the northern kingdom, Israel. And so he actually means that these kingdoms are going to be benefited by what God's about to do. But here's what's really interesting. The northern kingdom never actually really came back home the way the southern kingdom did. Now, not all Jews returned after the Babylonian captivity. They were already settled across the territory that had been controlled by Babylon. I mean, Daniel didn't go home. You remember that? He remained and became a high official in the Medo-Persian Empire. But more so, the southern kingdom came home and the temple was built, more so than you saw with the northern kingdom. So, okay, if the northern kingdom wasn't exactly going to come home and not all of the southern kingdom came home, what should we conclude from that? And I think we would have to say that part of the fulfillment of that is futuristic, so that it would include the church age, the millennium, the new heavens and new earth to come. I think that's not doing a disjustice at all. I think there's a prophetic element there. At the end of verse 2, there is again some strong language. The emptiers have emptied them out and ruined their vine branches. So this coalition led by the Babylonians is going to leave Nineveh empty, a hole, totally lacking. And did you notice it said, and ruin their vine branches? Now we need to remember that vineyards and fig trees are strongly associated with Israel. And we know that even Jesus in his actions and in his teaching indicated that. So the idea here is that the Assyrians have literally, seemingly at will, plundered what used to be God's turf and territory, but that's about to come to an end. It is coming to an end. So, okay, taunting starts this passage, and then Nahum shifts to literal description, explanation, choose the term that you think fits best, of what's going to happen in Nineveh. It hasn't happened yet, but it's almost like we can see in the rest of this book that destruction that is going to occur, and every word of it actually came to pass. So, okay, what kind of description does he give us? And it's very detailed. Notice at the beginning of verse 3, he's talking about shields of mighty men that are red, valiant men are in scarlet, and then he goes into this discussion of the chariots. Now, what is he talking about all of this that's red? Okay. Apparently, we are going to see, and history verifies it, that the Medes and the Babylonians liked red. We're going to see a graphic description of some of the weapons and the association of red with those weapons. What did it say? The shields of his mighty men are made red. It didn't say they were red. It said they're made red. So what does that mean? Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 23 and verse 14. And I'm using the New Living Translation. I like the way it expresses it. Then she carried her prostitution even further. She fell in love with pictures that were painted on a wall. Pictures of Babylonian military officers outfitted in striking red uniforms. So this idea that they might have had dye or something that made their uniform coppery or red-ish. We're going to even see the term scarlet, so it sounds red. And it is apparently true that they took their shields and either painted them or overlaid them with copper so that when the sun hit them, there would be that reddish glow. Now, Calvin suggests that there was a reason for this, that they did it to frighten their enemies with the bright color or to hide blood. Because if you think your enemy is wounded, that enemy may seem vulnerable, weaker, and you might be encouraged to surge forward and fight harder, thinking that you could conquer. That may be true. Either way, these soldiers from the artist renditions that I have seen of them would have been frightening. Now, Xenophon claims that the Medes really liked scarlet and that their tunics were totally red. I can see it. I mean, I do know that they had long since had the ability to dye things, and so that's not an unreasonable assumption that they could do that. Isn't it interesting, though? Here Nahum says, okay, all your red shields, all your weapons, all of those things, they're going to be there, but what's the message again? It's not going to do anything except contribute to the Babylonian coalition's effective defeat, destruction, annihilation of Nineveh. So he's describing the Babylonians and the Medes here as they are going to be the destroying force that takes Nineveh out. So then he talks about chariots, and he talks about chariots quite a bit. And there is this description of flaming torches. Now, I've looked up people smarter than I am to figure this out. Apparently, they took scythes. Okay, like if you were going to use a sling blade the old-fashioned way to cut grass, and there's that curved blade on the end of a stick or a pole, because you sharpen it and you cut grass and weeds and stuff with it. Well, apparently they had something similar to that. They took the blade and they attached them at a 90-degree angle to the wheels on their chariots, so that when those chariots rolled, there was literally sticking out on both sides blades that would hack up anything that got in the path of that chariot. So when the sun hit those, that metal, it would shine and look like a torch burning, but it was actually an instrument of major destruction of the enemy. In fact, it could cut down anything that was in the path of that chariot. And if someone tried to come up close to attack the person driving the chariot, those blades would be a formidable weapon that would protect the rider and destroy the attacker. And from what I've been able to figure out, these chariots decked out like that were literally the zenith of military weaponry in the 7th century BC. It was like, okay, you know the Old Testament talks a whole lot. They've got iron chariots. So I've seen that terminology, and I know you have too. So these chariots were difference makers in terms of being equipped for battle. So having them is like having the most sophisticated missiles or the most sophisticated defense system to protect from missiles. It would equate in our modern day with what they had at that particular point in time. Okay, so the Medes and the Babylonians have all these things, and they are a killing force. In verse 5, that there's a little line that says, he remembers his nobles. So what's being discussed here? In all likelihood, we're now talking about the king of Assyria mustering his best troops, but no matter what they are able to do against the forces of the Medes and the Persians, it's not going to be effective. God is going to use that Babylonian group to destroy what used to be the primary power and the primary empire. So all of these best troops or all of these leaders are just going to be something else that is totally futile. In fact, it will appear bumbling and ineffective because of the skill of the Babylonian and Median armies and what they're able to do. Now, we know the city fell. We know the palace was destroyed. At the end of verse 6, it says, the gates of the rivers are opened and the palace is dissolved. Isn't that interesting wording there? So what does that mean? Now, we know what happened. The city's destroyed and the palace dissolves. And there is conjecture, different kinds of scenarios that could have unfolded that would have brought about that result. In fact, I actually mentioned one of those last time. I told you about Ctesias, a Greek historian that was from the 5th century BC, who recorded this account that there was a drunken feast happening in Nineveh, and there was a sudden inundation of the Tigris River, that it swept away the city gates, that it washed away the foundation of the palace, and that the Babylonians were able to walk right into the city. I can't prove that. The Bible doesn't record that. What does the Bible record? The gates of the rivers are opened and the palace is dissolved. We know what happened. We don't exactly know what came about to bring those circumstances into place. Now, I do know this, that besides the Tigris River there on the west, there is also the Kosher, which is a spring-fed stream, and it ran right through Nineveh. I know that there was also a canal that ran through the city. And Sennacherib, you've heard his name, the Assyrian king that was bad news, built a series of dams to control water, and apparently this water became part of the defense system, helping to create moats around and in front of the wall, and maybe even some things behind the wall, as we talked about. But I don't know. There are all kinds of ways that water becomes a factor when you've got battles, particularly when there's a siege or an invasion. Maybe the invaders closed off the gates to the rivers, stopped the flow of the water, made it easier for them to get up close to Nineveh without having to deal with the moat and all of the other stuff. Who knows? Maybe there was an opportunity after that water was cut off and they were in position to release it again, and it would have come out with force because of the sheer quantity, and it would have unleashed a flood on the city. That's possible. Even if it did, it would not have lasted long because of the relationship between the elevation of Nineveh and the Tigris River, but it would have been enough. In all likelihood, the wall was a mixture of stone and mud bricks. In all likelihood, the palace was too. If that were true and a force of water hit it, they would practically dissolve. Now, I don't know how God did it. Here's what I know. The word says the gates of the rivers are opened and the palace is dissolved. Even though it was prophetic in advance, we know God said it and it came to pass. We are missing a few of the details as to how that came to pass. We know the word says it. Nineveh had once been a beautiful pool of water. All of her waterways neatly designed. All of the dams that were used to create that water barricade around the city were perfectly functional. But when God turned his face against Nineveh because he had given that wicked city the opportunity to repent under Jonah, then they turned back to their wicked ways. He allowed time to pass and they did not repent. So that long-suffering and patience that he exhibits was all used up. Their day of repentance was gone. Now, there is a reference to all of the treasures there. Take spoil of gold, there is no end of treasure, or wealth of every desirable prize. Take it, plunder her. Take the riches of Nineveh. So what's that talking about? What is actually meant here? We know good and well that God has pulled the plug. The pools of water are not going to be the defense. We know that the plunderer is now about to be plundered. The scatterer is now about to be scattered. And that there are riches beyond our comprehension stored up in the city of Nineveh, because Nineveh has raided countless other cities and towns and smaller empires that crumbled, and they stole all their wealth. So there was treasure there to take, much treasure there to take. So it's about to be desolate, plundered, completely destroyed. And the idea is emptiness. Did you hear that? In fact, it's sad. She is empty, desolate, and waste. The heart melts and the knees shake. Much pain is in every side, and all their faces are drained of color. So all of the wealth, all of the celebration, all of the partying, all of the victories, that's all about to be gone. The treasures of other countries that have been taken from them are now about to be stripped from Nineveh and the Assyrians as well. The wealth is going to be gone. The beauty is going to be gone. The feeling of safety that city was impenetrable is going to be dispelled. It's a myth. It's gone. The survivors are going to see ruin where there was once a flourishing and thriving metropolis. Now, Nahum actually goes on to share why Nineveh has fallen. And he tauntingly asks where the pride of Nineveh has gone. Where has it gone? And he uses an absolutely ironic image in order to do that, because he starts talking about lions, the king of the beasts. And here's the truth. Assyrian rulers often depicted themselves as king of the beasts, and lions were kind of like the national symbol. Lions would have been to Assyria what the eagle is to the United States of America. So here, Nahum picks that symbol of strength, that symbol that represents the Assyrians, that symbol that the kings that were so wicked often relied on and used as like bragging grounds. And there were all different kinds of lions that were in the sculptures and in the artworks of the Assyrians. Some of them had wings. Some of them had the head of a man. But all of it was a form of arrogance, boasting of strength and power. These people who never showed mercy, who attacked, pillaged, and destroyed, who tore their prey apart like lions, never showing any kind of mercy, were going to be conquered and killed with no mercy shown to them. Remember, the word does say that we reap what we have sown. Jesus actually taught this principle too. He says, all who take the sword will perish by the sword. That's Matthew 26:52. This city was so annihilated, the ruins ultimately just dust and powder and ruins and buried through time, so much so that for centuries, other soldiers, other conquering peoples literally marched across the site that used to be Nineveh without ever realizing what lay underneath. I call your attention to Hosea chapter 5, verses 13 and 14. When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to King Jareb. Yet he cannot cure you, nor heal you of your wound. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. I, even I, will tear them away and go away. I will take them away, and no one shall rescue. Okay, not anymore, because now God himself is against Nineveh. The brutality and inhumanity of the Assyrians that has been so horrendous that God has declared war on them. Remember, he cannot tolerate and excuse evil. It is not in his character. He can't do it. The opportunity for mercy and repentance is gone. So now they're going to get the torture and the grief they deserve. Wow. So we've seen this description of the coming judgment of Nineveh in chapter 2. All attempts to defend it will be in vain. Floods are going to inundate the city and sweep away all these mighty man-made structures, including the palace. Nineveh's citizens are going to be carried away captive, and many of them will fall in terror when they see what's happening. Precious treasures will be plundered. All strength and all will and desire to fight will be gone. The mighty lion's den would literally be reduced to desolation, because the Lord said it, I am against you, and that settles it. Now, in chapter 3, Nahum goes into that prophetic woe mode. Let's look at the first 7 verses. Woe to the bloody city, Nineveh. It is all full of lies and robbery. Its victim never departs. The noise of a whip, the noise of rattling wheels, of galloping horses, of clattering chariots. horsemen charged with bright sword and glittering spear. There is a multitude slain, a great number of bodies, countless corpses. They stumble over the corpses because of the multitude of harlotries of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries. Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will lift up your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. I will cast abominable, I'll get it out, filth upon you, make you vile, and make you a spectacle. It shall come to pass that all who look upon you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Where shall I see comforters for you? Oh my goodness. In graphic language with corpses everywhere, we hear this description of the bloody city, which is Nineveh, the one who has been, not the city, but the people who inhabit it, guilty of shedding the blood of many, many people who were innocent victims. Basically, this city was founded and maintained on bloodshed, murder, and one endless war right after another one. Nineveh made promises, made truces, promised people things, promised countries things, and empires things. Never happened. Could not trust Nineveh. Deceit, extortion, violence were the normal order of the day. Wealth and power made Nineveh strong, but she was a seductive ally. You could not trust her. She was really a harlot, demanding high payment for her services, all to benefit her and nothing to benefit anyone else. In verse 2, again, we see all these graphic and vivid terms about the siege of the city. It's almost possible to hear the whips cracking, the rattling of those chariot wheels with those pieces of sharp metal sticking out, the horses leaping and the swords flashing and slashing, the spears flying through the air, and death everywhere. There would be no time to bury the dead in this horrendous battle. And let me make note of the fact that proper burial was very important in the ancient world. You saw me hesitate. Living people will actually stumble over the dead that are piled up. That's what Nahum says. To tell you the truth, there is no passage in all of Hebrew literature that surpasses that one right there for vividness of the description of violence, fighting, and death. Did you hear Nahum compare Nineveh to a well-favored harlot? Now, when God calls Israel a harlot, he's talking about being unfaithful to God and chasing idols, because Israel had a covenant relationship with God and was supposed to be faithful. But when God has Nahum call the Assyrians harlots, or Nineveh a harlot, he's talking about their methodology, the way they are cruel, and it's almost like witchcraft and sorcery, the way they treat people. So through all of her cunning ways, Nineveh literally cheats everyone else and has disgraced herself. So she is going to fall under the same kind of judgment that a prostitute would fall under according to the law. Did you notice? He said he's going to make you hide. Nineveh, you're going to hide your face like your skirt is pulled over, and you're going to be exposed to the nations of the world. So he's basically saying the same way a prostitute or an adulteress would be treated. That means public exposure, total disgrace. They would have been stoned. He says that's the kind of treatment that you're going to receive. In fact, the greatest contempt and filth that exist is going to be cast on you, Nineveh, and all of you Assyrians. You'll be the laughing stock of the nations of the world. In fact, people are going to look at what happens to you and run in terror because they don't even want to stay and see the misery that is coming on you. You'll be friendless. You'll be an object of scorn. You will be disgusting to the world. Goodness gracious. I mean, so we've heard God over and over and over and over say, I'm against you. I gave you these chances, and I actually used you as an instrument. I sent Jonah to you too a long time ago, but you won't do right. You had your chance. And in graphic language, he tells exactly what's going to happen through his servant Nahum. Okay, let's go. My time is flying. To verse 8 of chapter 3. Are you better than Nahum, that was situated by the river, that has the waters around her, whose rampart was the sea, whose wall was the sea? Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was boundless. Put and Lubim were your helpers, yet she was carried away. She went into captivity. Her young children also were dashed to pieces. At the head of every street, they cast lots for her honorable men. And all her great men were bound in chains. You also will be drunk, you will be hidden, you also will seek refuge from the enemy. All your strongholds are fig trees with ripened figs. If they are shaken, they fall into the mouth of the eater. Surely your people in your midst are women. The gates of your land are wide open for your enemies. Fire shall devour the bars of your gates. Did you hear that? Your gates are wide open for your enemies. Kind of makes me think that account about the gates being washed away might be true, but again, we don't know what happened. Now, let me make some things clear. The beginning of this section, we're not talking just about Nineveh. We're about to give Nineveh a prime example that should have taught a lesson, but nobody paid attention. Nobody at all. Now, are you better than Nahum? Nineveh, do you think you're better than Nahum? What is Nahum? First of all, Ammon was the supreme sun god of the Egyptians. And Ammon was the city of Ammon, or the primary city devoted to that god. But that city had another name. It was Thebes. So Thebes was located on the upper Nile River, about 350 miles south of modern-day Cairo. It was the center of the Egyptian empire for, 1,400 years or so, until Assyria conquered it in 663 BC. Hold up. So this description here is what Assyria did to Thebes. Oh. Now you have to understand, it was the primary center of what empire? The Egyptian empire. It's a big place. It's a powerful place. It's an important place. It's a well-known place. It is surrounded by waterways. It has sacred temples, and in a lot of ways reminds us of Nineveh. It had big allies like Put, which was Somaliland, and Lubin, which was Libya, or we would relate to those terms better. The greatness of that city was legendary, and it fell at the hands of Assyria under Ashurbanipal, like Sennacherib, one of the bad guys of Assyria. So the horrible things that were done in Thebes, though they were common for that day, they were typical for the Assyrians. Nahum now lists them and says, look, you remember what you did to Thebes? You should learn. You should have known then that there is no city that's so great, so strong, and so strategically located with natural protection. There is no guarantee that you are safe and protected and you are exempt and no one else can come along and conquer you. because the Ninevites thought no one could defeat them. But they did not remember and understand the fact that God had brought cities down in the past that were great, and this unrepentant, wicked city was going to fall as well. Isn't it interesting? God writes the lessons we should learn throughout history in great big letters. We don't learn. Nineveh didn't learn. The warning of no Ammon should have taught them, you're not exempt. There are no guarantees. And now Nineveh would drink the full cup of God's wrath. Oh my goodness. Isaiah 51:17, 21 through 23, Jeremiah 25:15 to 28, Ezekiel 23:33 and 34. So many scriptures add to that concept and support that idea. And everything prophetically that was said happened to the letter. Nineveh disappeared totally from the scene of history until 1842, when archaeologists Boda, Layard, and Rawlinson discovered ruins of Nineveh. Nahum is basically saying, Nineveh, you're ripe for judgment, and your enemies are eager to partake of your fruit. In fact, the conquest of Nineveh is going to be so easy, it'll be like shaking ripe figs from the tree that fall right into the mouth of the person that is catching them. There's even a comment about women not being trained for war. And of course, women, in my opinion, though it's not a matter of intelligence, in terms of brute physical strength, women are not designed for hand-to-hand combat with a man. And so I think Nahum is probably saying that maybe their men are so afraid they're no more effective than women, or maybe the men have fallen and now there's nothing left but women. I can't really say for sure, but it's not flattering, whatever it is. Okay, only a few minutes to finish here, so stay with me as we complete this powerful little book. Beginning in verse 14 of chapter 3, draw your water for the siege. Fortify your strongholds. Go into the clay and tread the mortar. Make strong the brick kiln. There the fire will devour you. The sword will cut you off. It will eat you up like a locust. Make yourself many like the locust. Make yourself many like the swarming locust. You have multiplied your merchants more than the stars of heaven. The locust plunders and flies away. Your commanders are like swarming locusts, and your generals like great grasshoppers, which camp in the hedges on a cold day. When the sun rises, they flee away, and the place where they are is not known. Your shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Your nobles rest in the dust. Your people are scattered on the mountains, and no one gathers them. Your injury has no healing. Your wound is severe. All who hear news of you will clap their hands over you. For upon whom has not your wickedness passed continually? So here, Nahum is describing normal preparation for a siege. Water's always going to be a target of the enemy's efforts. A shortage of water would certainly wilt any attempted defense, and it would be necessary to have more brick so that they could prop up and repair damage to fortifications. But despite any amount of effort that could be expended, it is vain. Ancient sources indicate for us that the Assyrian king died in the fire that consumed his palace under that attack. So fire and the sword and the combined effect of the flooding waters, Nineveh was going to look like it had been overrun by locusts. And then Nahum does this quick flip and actually compares the people of Nineveh to locusts, to a locust horde. He says Nineveh's going to look like locusts ate up everything there was, and then he turns and talks about the people like they're locusts. So basically he's suggesting that Ninevites, you cannot escape what I am foretelling as a prophet of the living God, what I'm speaking over you. No one could doubt that Nineveh was commercially preeminent. It was one of the great trade centers of the ancient world. It conducted commerce with other nations, especially Phoenicia was a source of very lucrative trade for the Assyrians. The military leaders are compared to locusts with stiff wings that are cold but regain strength and vitality when the sun warms them. And we know locusts in the Middle East were and still are a very destructive force. It hasn't been very long since we heard of locusts in Africa just destroying everything. They're very interesting little creatures, and such a powerful consideration in the Middle East that the Hebrew language has about, I think, almost 12 words to describe or to name locusts. They can fly away without leaving a trace of anything. And it's that feature that the prophet Nahum seems to focus on here. The shepherds mentioned here are obviously governors and political figures and officials, the kind of people the king would depend on. Instead of rallying to help and defend Nineveh, they slumber in death. They've been killed. So there's no leadership. The people scatter. And the queen city of the ancient East is destroyed, and its inhabitants are lost. Nineveh would be so utterly destroyed, but that's not all of it. It would never be rebuilt. After the city fell in 612 BC, not only would nations rejoice over her, remember he said they'll clap over you, but it would become deserted and desolate, an area for animals and birds. Zephaniah chapter 2, verses 13 to 15 affirm that. And he will stretch out his hand against the north, destroy Assyria, and make Nineveh a desolation, as dry as the wilderness. The herds shall lie down in her midst. Every beast of the nation, both the pelican and the bittern, shall lodge on the capitals of her pillars. Their voice shall sing in the wilderness. Desolation shall be at the threshold, for he will lay bare the cedar work. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt securely, that said in her heart, I am it, and there is none besides me. How has she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down? Every one who passes by her shall hiss and shake his fist. Wow. So we see Zephaniah verifying exactly what Nahum is saying here. Now, to some people, the response to this prophecy would be, well, God's judgment's just too harsh. It's just too severe. It's just not right. But truthfully, he's justified in his condemnation of a bloody city, a city guilty of shedding innocent blood. I do believe that God holds us accountable for the way we treat people. I believe that with my whole heart. I don't think we could adhere to and believe in the gospel if we didn't adhere to that theology. This city was known for deceit, falsehood, theft, debauchery. The vice in that city was an offense to a holy God. So the verdict was inevitable. The only consideration was when. So like Nahum, which is Thebes, remember, Nineveh could not escape divine judgment. You remember when we went into this study last time, I told you there's some things we should learn. God is against sin and evil. He does not tolerate abuse of other people, and sin and evil will ultimately be judged. Because of that, we know God is patient and long-suffering, but we need to examine our own hearts and our own attitudes and behaviors to make sure that we are right. God does offer mercy and comfort to those who are faithful, and that's awesome because he wins every time. And we need to be sure to enjoy God's presence and power, but also to be motivated to share the good news, to be those kind of feet that share and spread the gospel of peace. And then we need to leave judgment to God, and he'll do a good job of that. Okay, short little book, powerful, graphic description, another reminder that there's a sundown on God's mercy. Walk in His peace, examine your own hearts, and may we live a life before people that they see God's love and that they not see the wickedness that resided in Nineveh. God bless. Till next time.